Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to bring you my guest, Rachel Liu, the founder of the Inclusive Pioneers. She's humanizing learning and pioneering inclusive cultures. Thanks for joining me today, Rachel.
Well, thanks for having me, Suki.
So, we are going to talk today about cultural intelligence, invisible voices, and what we can do about it. Yeah? So, would you like to tell me about yourself and why this is very special subject for you, please?
Yeah, so I guess, where to start? This year, I think with everything crazy that's going on, the Black Lives Matter really, I guess, opened up the opportunity and gave me a lot of reflection space of what really matters. And I guess I wanted to share and contribute in some way based on my only personal experience. So I wrote a blog which is quite reflective and which I would never usually do, actually. I'm not a person that likes to be public with writing. It's something that I've always had a bit of a barrier with. But I thought it was important to identify that invisible voices matter because we don't hear enough of them, especially of cultures where we are meant to be respectful and act a certain way. So therefore, our voice by default doesn't quite get heard. And as like a woman of color, there's so much cultural expectations that plays along that influences that. But if we don't have people's voices heard, then we can't really shift some of the kind of systemic problems that's happening at the moment. We have to undo a lot of generational things. So it was a way to almost start a conversation. And I was curious as a mini project, a passion project, to see who else would be interested in talking about this in a safe space. So that's where Inclusive Pioneers was kind of born from the kind of COVID, just as a side passion project to kind of explore, well, what are the ways that we can shape culture to make it more inclusive? And a lot of my work that I've been doing in the last 5 years, I do a lot of cultural research to really think about how do I design better learning experiences for people around the world? And a lot of them are focused where English is their second language, from someone as young as a 3-year-old all the way to adulthood. And because of that, and understanding, wow, okay, every insight I get, every time I research, there's always something surprising that I have biases, or I just had blind spots, or I had no idea. And I take that for granted now because I look for those things where I might have biases and incorporate that in research. What I didn't realize is that other people might have those blind spots as well. They're not aware of them. So recently, I think it was last week or the week before, we started just prototyping like, well, what does an inclusive space look like to have an honest, open conversation? And that's where Cultural Circles was kind of born as a little small initiative to see what does that look like to facilitate that space for people to feel safe, to be heard and to be open, to be seen. And we thought that actually change starts within, change starts with I. You can't create change without that awareness. So that's why I introduced that topic first, which is about, well, how do we even identify our own cultural blind spots? We live in I guess, an acronym called like weird society, where things are westernized by default. You know, we're educated, we're kind of industrialized, rich and democratic, that we take it for granted. So we assume that people have that same thinking, but people are brought up so differently. So how do we have empathy for that, for people who've never experienced any of that? So we need to question our kind of certain assumptions of the way we've been thinking and been taught or be conditioned, and undo some of that, but with curiosity. It's not saying there's blame or judgment. It's actually just to learn from it and to be open from it. And I think only if we do that, we can actually create change.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you mentioned about the privileged blind spot.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was a small reflection thing and of statements that just to even something where English is your first language. So originally I was like, oh, I'm a bit of privilege because I was born in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, when I looked into the statement one step further, I realized that it's not 100% true, because when I was born, my grandparents looked after me. So they wouldn't have spoken to me in English. They would have spoken to me in Cantonese, but a particular dialect as well, because they came from this really small island near Hong Kong. And my dad wanted me and my brother to be raised to know Cantonese. So they wanted that immersive learning from the beginning. So technically, I would have not have started learning English until maybe play school, or maybe when I started primary school. So actually, there is still, am I completely privileged? Well, to a certain degree, because I've had the education in the UK. And it's only when I went to China and lived in China, experienced absolute culture shock, then I'm like, oh, wow, their education system is so different. No wonder their thinking and the way that they think of things is so different to mine. And even certain cultural values started to surface and be of question that I didn't really understand until I experienced that shock.
Yeah, because it was how old were you when you went to China for work?
So when I was younger, I used to go to Hong Kong every few years because my parents are from Hong Kong and they wanted us to see family and everything. That one is not so much of a culture shock because you are the tourists, you are, but even then, the locals would be asking, are you an ABC or are you a BBC? So are you American-born Chinese or are you British-born Chinese? When I'm having a haircut, they asked me that. So they already started to classify and judge where to categorize you.
How do they know?
I guess from the accent, the way that I speak, because my Cantonese won't be as fluent as a Hong Kong native speaker. But the shock was actually living in China. So moving to China to work about, I think that's 6 years ago now. And having to do everything from basics, like how do you navigate to from the airport to accommodation without knowing any Mandarin? How do you navigate to open a bank account without knowing, setting yourself up? How do you even look for accommodation to live for the time that I had? And it's all so different, so surreal. And because I didn't speak Mandarin, the locals judged me on that because the appearance is that I looked Chinese, but I couldn't speak it. And then they thought that because I wasn't willing to speak it, and I was more elite. So they interpreted that way rather than going, no, I just can't speak it. So that's why I'm trying to communicate to you in English and in Cantonese. But obviously it isn't working. But that's where cultural expectations are just so different.
Yeah, because I remember you were mentioning about that visit to GP.
Yeah, I know. So it was, I wasn't feeling that well and I knew I had to go to a local GP, and my friend, bless her, she went with me and accompanied me. And I was so uncomfortable when waiting in the GP, like in the waiting area, and then they called my name to see me. But then I'm like, oh, hold on a minute. Why am I not in a private room? You know, like as I expected in the UK. Everyone else was there hearing what my problem was. I was like, where's the privacy with that? Why would they want to know everything? I'm not comfortable with sharing that. And it was only later when I asked my friend, it was more like, oh yeah, but it's actually good to share because that means they build their knowledge. You know, so that it's that shared collective knowledge that they're building. So it's like, oh, so if, say, their son has that problem, they have a bit more knowledge on that. I'm like, huh? That's really, really strange. But that doesn't mean that it's wrong. You know, my judgment, first of all, because I felt uncomfortable and I'm used to a level of privacy, I judged it as wrong. But it isn't the case. It's just that their values, like, well, there is a benefit, obviously, for people to share their knowledge, right? They just do it more intimately than what I'm used to. So that's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So, because you've been traveling quite a lot and you've been exposed to different cultures and you are much more knowledgeable than me, for example. So what was the
Oh,
most
really?
shocking culture? What was the most shocking culture one you got? Most culture shock you got? Like you were like, whoa, I've never expected that type of.
I think for me, it's the basic needs. When something is such a shock and so different to the way that you do things, and how you think, how you're taught to think, it's the complete, it's where basic needs are not met. I think it's like that. So, for example, I didn't realize in China that you have to be so careful about where you go shopping to trust the source of your vegetable and your meat. I never had to question that much in the UK, but you have to. It's the kind of by default in the UK. If they say something on the label is this, we can trust it. It's been certified, or there's certain standards and it's verified. In China, there's so much like distrust. You don't really know what is fake and what is real. And that was so hard to navigate because I was like, oh, why do I feel ill? Why do I, and I didn't realize sometimes it was, say, for example, the oil that was used with the cooking that made me feel ill. Or maybe it's the amount of MSG that was added into dishes by default that made you feel ill. Like, I would never have questioned basic things that I take for granted in UK, that it would be so difficult. And I think that kind of trust is built so differently in China and in the Western world. And it comes across when doing business. And one time, and I've told this to a couple of my colleagues, actually, I guess it's like there's some invisible cultural expectations. So one time I was doing research and I was hopping around different schools in China. And one of the schools, I didn't go in the end. I thought the third party, because he can speak Mandarin, I was only a representative of my company, of Pearson at the time. And I didn't turn up to that school. I didn't think it was a problem because the third party has been moderating the interviews and so forth. I was just there to listen in, to have it translated if need to. But because what that school did, they had a massive banner that says, "Welcome Rachel Liu, from Pearson Education," all of this. I didn't turn up. That meant that they lost face And losing face is a concept in China, in Chinese culture, that is, it's not good. It's basically you break relationships. So it's almost like the school director wasn't happy the fact that I didn't turn up. They weren't. So during the interviews, it comes across as well. And I didn't know any of this because I was flying back to UK, because I was like, oh, I was exhausted. I've been hopping around in China, different parts of the school. This last school, it's okay. Research has been going well. I can trust the third party moderator, but they don't trust the third party moderator because they were promised to cease a representative from the UK, even though I don't speak Mandarin, to be there, because it's the reputation. And it's like, wow, they're coming to my school to interviews, that I never thought of it as that, and thought of it showing up as part of that building trust and that relationship. And that's why trust is built by relationship first. It's not about what the credibility stuff that we have in the Western world. And when I came back, there was a complaint that was made to the sales team that told me that, and we had to pay a bit of compensation because of it. So there was even a cost at the end of it. And that was a lesson that I've learned in the hard way, that I didn't know about. Whereas at another school, when one of the school directors were like, oh, do you want to have lunch together before we have the interview? Now, usually I'm like, oh, well, I'm quite tired. I've traveled a lot. But it's not about how I feel, because in the Western culture, it's okay to kind of say, no, it's okay, don't feel like it. But I ended up having lunch with them, and that was part of the building that relationship. So even during the interview, now looking back, it was so much more richer, the insights and openness of what things they shared, because we had the lunch together. Even though, again, I didn't speak Mandarin, because I was the representative for that company, the third party was translating between us, but that was still building relationship. That was still important to them. So what is important to them, I might have missed because I didn't think it was important for me. So.
Yeah, I totally get it, because this cultural thing, it's completely different. And now I'm adjusted maybe 70%, I guess. But still, there are like things come up, and I'm just like, what am I like? Is it business, or is it friendship, or it's just, it's so confusing. Yeah. So you talked about invisible voices, and invisible voices matter, and they matters. But what we can do about them.
Yeah, so at work, we try to, so innovation, if we think about innovation, is doing things differently. And I think now more than ever, we need to think differently. Otherwise, we keep coming up with the same sort of solution that doesn't solve this kind of problem. So actually, it's really healthy to say, take the extremes perspective. And one could be, an example would be, because I studied a bit of social innovation, is looking at people who maybe are more vulnerable, for example. So if we want to create something that is more inclusive for people to use, like more, say, for example, a public service like NHS or for government, we need to look at those who are maybe more vulnerable groups, because those insights are the ones that leads to innovation in a way. They give you a lens of empathy, but they give you a different way of solving things that is unexpected. And actually, that's where the creativity also comes. So I think it's an advantage for people who have started to do, say, coming up with more social business or social good, kind of thinking about it in that perspective. It is actually beneficial. So say, for example, where like the English, where English is the second language. Now, if you know and understand what their needs are from that context, it's sometimes the smallest things that we kind of cater and we show care. It's the things that we actually makes it more long lasting, makes it build trust, makes it build that actually, isn't that what we want? Has more, not just, you know, both for a business, but also, you know, kind of personal, right? Wouldn't we want to have more, you know, we are human beings, we are social human beings. We want connection with others. You know, so I think there is something to that actually it comes down to the needs are still the same, but the how it's met might be different. It might be nuanced. But actually, if those nuanced things are taken care of, I think that means that, you know, you kind of, I guess it's a way of like, you help everyone grow, actually, in a way. You know, if you can help someone who, say, have a learning disability, right? Actually, that will also make it maybe more accessible for everyone else anyways. So some people talk about, oh, accessibility means it's more costly, you know, it's more time consuming. But actually, if we're looking at the longer term benefit, you are reaching a wider group of people. They might appreciate you because they never usually have their needs met, and you're catering for them. And actually, the power of like word of mouth and recommendations go a long way.
Absolutely.
So
yeah. So because I've mentioned it yesterday to you, because if we don't intentionally include, the risk is unintentionally exclude. That's just so powerful, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's empowering the fact that we have a choice, right? So
Yes, we do.
we can actually go, well, we intentionally want to include the voices of kids because they will show us something that we wouldn't even expect. And that means more creative ways of, you know, thinking about the problem space. And some people's like, well, they don't have a voice, they can't articulate it. They can articulate in different mediums. We just need to find the right mediums. So, you know, they can articulate with arts and crafts. They are amazing at imagining stories. They can tell you a lot through that. So there was an example where we ran what we call like a co-creation kind of workshop with kids. And we had those where some of them where English is their first language or English is their second language. And it was interesting by what they design on their postcard, how much text that they've written. It really highlighted the difference of literacy between the two. That is the evidence. You don't need to be super, I don't know, intellectual, academic about it. You know, sometimes. And that's enough to help us go, oh, that's what matters for the kids. You know, that's how we can bring it to life. And actually, they're probably better at bringing it to life than us sometimes. I think, you know, it's the kind of, the different perspectives enables us to connect dots in different ways. And it makes us to be more creative than thinking about constraints and things a lot of the times. It can open our imagination. So yeah, and it maybe invites us to play, because how many times, like in a work environment, we don't feel like we have permission to play. So and that's important for both personal and professional, you know.
Yeah, definitely. So if you think about like Western and Eastern world, we definitely can coexist, and we do. But how we make this cultural awareness to become more inclusive, I guess. So would let other people know what you're doing to make that happen. to make aware that all this cultural intelligence work you're doing?
Yeah, I think it starts with conversations and people who are curious. I actually think it's not just the East and the West. I think there are multifaceted cultures. If you think about, okay, a lot of my friends, they're growing up where they started to have kids and they are blended mix, a lot of them. And surely that for their kids, they want their kids to have a sense of belonging. We all do, right? And I think we have to relate back onto the need, and that's what brings us together. And I think it's listening to people's actual stories. It's what brings it to life. Again, there's a lot of the academic side of things at the moment, or a lot of talk about what's right, what's wrong, or we categorize things, like this is for women, this is for BAME, this is for, but sometimes if we keep doing that, we don't have people that we need in the conversation to also see. So, for example, yes, there are communities to promote women for certain things for the equity, but men need to be in the conversation as well, for example. And if we're going to bring the East and the West, we need both East and the West representatives coming together to listen to that. Because I think only then, when you bring them along into the process, you immerse them with the learning, then they will see. Because part of it is that we don't see. And we need to open newer ways of seeing in the first place. So obviously, if we can't see, we can't do anything about it. So it's almost creating new lenses, like a camera lens, and being curious, like an explorer navigating. Like, I know we can't travel now, but the concept of a traveler is someone who is curious about, I guess, one thing that can bring us together is food culture. So why is it that, say, London, they've done really well of mixing up, right, the kind of fusion of the East and the West type thing, right? They borrow certain ideas and inspiration, and you see it in the kind of arts world as well, maybe in certain, I don't know, even the way we think about design, I don't know, interior and stuff, like the Japanese kind of wabi-sabi, the imperfectionist kind of thing, but nature and with the, kind of bringing those elements. That's where the interesting things can happen, because you're mixing things together, you're making new recipes and you're making new dishes as a result. So I think the food metaphor is a really interesting one, because that's a common thing that everyone understands. And I think if you were going to make it inclusive, make it as inclusive the language as a child to understand. So it's like the child's test. If the child understands it, it means it's simple enough for other people to understand it, regardless of the language barrier. We can do it through picture, through words, like in different, and illustrate it through different mediums. And I think it's that experimentation kind of mindset is really important. Like as I said, like how cooking different dishes and having different flavors, that's what makes it really unique and different, and makes it special as well. So if we can do that with food, we can do that in other ways, I believe.
Yeah, that's really good one. Yeah. So when I asked you, Rachel, what's your favorite quote, you gave me this one: our goal in life is not to become perfect. Our goal is to become whole. Why do you like this quote?
Because because during my reflection process, I gear a lot into perfectionism, and I think society gears a lot into perfectionism, in the way we have to be a certain way. We have to like the whole idea of, say, happiness. we have to always be happy. We have to strive for happiness all the time. We're not allowed to have bad emotions and everything. And I
Yeah,
think
deal with it.
during,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think
Mm-hmm.
actually we want to, all of that is part of a human experience. And I think it's actually normal, natural to experience all of that. And I think that wholeness is the meaning, you know, what makes you you. And I think that's the really, and what makes you you is the gift that you offer to the world. And I think a lot of us, we feel like we have to strive for a particular goal and achieve that, but that doesn't help us to become whole in all aspects. And we divide the kind of professional and personal, but actually it's more powerful when you bring them together, that kind of coexistence, as you said. So for me, I was fighting for a long time between this East and this West, until someone reframed it for me and go, could you not let it coexist? You know, can you not let the best of both? Because that is actually who you are, is both of that. That is what makes you whole. Rather than going, East is better this way, West is better this way, I'm going to keep going and striving for this Western way, for example. But actually what makes me more unique and what makes it powerful is the fact that I can integrate the two. And that becomes the gift, right? And that's my own personal learning through the years. That's why this one has stuck with me, because I'm still working towards this
Yeah.
integrating it.
Aren't we all, Rachel?
I'm glad I'm not alone.
We all same, to be honest. Let's talk about, because you mentor people, like probably young people, or and then you got your own mentee as well.
Yeah, no, I love mentoring people because it's a way of giving back. And I like seeing how people grow. So I do it more, I guess, both informally and formally. So more formally is for those who wants to transition to a career in user experience or service design. Because of my professional experience, then they come to me to, you know, kind of have some guidance and some help on the way. And then more recently, I'm looking into, I haven't started yet because of COVID, it keeps delaying, and we're meant to go to the school itself to help disadvantaged kids to basically have a kind of toolkit to build their confidence, to build their resilience. There's like 4 different talent toolbox that we wanted to teach, and so that's going towards coaching. But I thought that was also another way of growing myself, but also giving back as well. So it should be starting in a couple of weeks. So for young kids, and I haven't done that for them yet, but I've done it more for the, I guess, professional. And I do it for anyone who, because I'm a line manager, I kind of do that to my peers and those as well. And I do it as approach of my kind of general life. Like my brother will always come to me for just kind of to have a conversation and kind of be mentored in a way. Has the big sister sort of role. So maybe I gravitate to that naturally. But also I found that a leadership style that I aspire to is the type that mentors and coaches as a way of teaching to give back, rather than instructing what you need to know, what you need to do. So I find that being in the education sector for the last like 6 years has taught me how to be a better learner, but also how to be one that kind of facilitates change, and the type of, I guess, teacher I aspire to be more informally, and that's through mentoring and coaching.
So what type of leader are you?
Yes, so it is I guess, hopefully an inclusive, inclusive kind of leadership with very visionary, I guess. I'm a visionary person. I guess that's part of my creativity since childhood, having, maybe because I'm very, I like bigger picture, and I like drawing things, and I like making those things happen. So part of that is the craft of things as well. Yeah, and then the coaching and facilitating kind of leadership too. Yeah.
Fantastic. So who do you look up to?
That's a hard one, actually. I found that, I don't know if you found the same, but finding a role model, which is a woman role model of color, is quite rare. I don't know if you found the same, but I'm actually struggling with that one, finding many that resonates. Not sure if I have a recent direct one, because I have a lot of different mentors for different things, because they're given. So I purposely chosen to do that because I know they've got different perspectives and skill sets and backgrounds. And it keeps me growing in a way. But I don't have a direct person right now I can think of. Yeah.
So you are becoming one for the future generation.
I would like to see that, yeah. And actually my niece is probably one person that keeps me. So when I became an auntie, the first thing I said was like, I am going to be a role model for my niece, to say, like, what does it look like to be a woman of color in this world? So that's one thing I definitely just decided that it was important for her to have a role model, because if we don't have role models, we might not think things are possible. So if there are not if we don't see the representatives in society, we feel that there is a certain limit and limitation. We just don't. I mean, how about you? Do you have a particular role model that you aspire to right now?
I have different ones depending what skills. Like, I don't have like all around one. I would like to learn to speak someone like that, and I would like to. It's all different types. So I love Lisa Nichols. I'm not sure if you know her. She's a speaker trainer,
Right.
and like she shows what she's speaking, so you can see, imagine, and it's just absolutely amazing. And I just tend to learn from different people. I don't have one, and I'm learning from the Benjamin Hardy, and obviously it's him.
Yeah.
And he brought about your future you, and what he said was, look yourself in 10 years time and look up to that. That should be your hero. So, and you become that hero yourself.
But that's interesting. Maybe actually having more than one role model then is the healthier thing to do, right? Because no one can specialize in everything and be that that one individual. But actually it's individuals that is that kind of motivation to keep you going, and someone that you look up to, so that you can grow into that, because that's something that you aspire and you need, or you want.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then sometimes, to be honest, Rachel, it's a bit confusing, because I can see you doing great thing, and I know lots of other people who is doing like such an amazing things, and I just like admire them all, and then like, oh, you're great there, oh, that's awesome. And it just like was, oh, okay, yeah, welcome to my world.
I wonder if we all feel like that in some ways. That's why having the conversations is quite good, right? Because as I told you earlier, I think that what you're doing you are being really inclusive in the sense of your platform, that you allow anyone to, to kind of share their passion and what they're doing. You have a platform for that, and that, for anyone to do that. And that's amazing, because some people might be afraid, but you're giving them that extra boost, that like, hey, it's okay, you can share your story, and I find you interesting. Like that's already really encouraging. And that, for some people, is exactly what they need to even have their voices heard. So in some ways, you're already helping to shape inclusive pioneers unintentionally.
Actually, that's really nice to know, like to think about this impossible conversation that way, because I just thought so many people around us doing absolutely amazing things, and they can just come and share their story. Who am I to dictate your story is good enough to be here? Your story is just, oh, come back later. I don't know. Well, I don't know. Like, it's not suitable for me. Like, who am I to say that?
But
It's
that's
like,
why I think it's amazing that you already kind of know that they do have an insightful story to tell and to share, that it matters, rather than the barrier which we usually, you always have to enter a competition, you have to apply for certain thing, qualify to have a certain criteria to be allowed to have permission to share that. Whereas you're just saying, no, you're welcome. And I think that's such a strong message. I wonder if, I can actually be learning from you right now in exchange of what that inclusive pioneers might become.
inclusive pioneers. I went to your first workshop, so could you tell us like more plan? What's next step? How it's going to progress further? Let's talk about that a little bit. Yeah.
Well, I haven't managed to reflect on it actually since the session. So the idea initially is to start to have a circle where it's almost to listen, to reflect, and have that space, because we don't often reflect. And it's interesting because part of learning, we learn, we consume new things, we consume new ideas, new concepts and things. We might apply it, but we never reflect of how much we've really learned, other than stats. But that's different. Because that depth of learning is through that reflection, then you really consolidate on what you take away. So I wanted to create that space because that felt like it was a need as the first things to do and try out. I think it's getting the right cadence of like how frequently. So me and one other person who I only met through COVID, by the way, and she helped to co-facilitate the session with me. So it's almost nice to have someone else. I did wonder, because I don't have the capacity, could people co-create and host these and start these conversations, so that maybe when I've done one session and it works out okay, could someone else host it somewhere and keep having those conversations? Because I don't think it's being had, or it's just so early on. There's so many possibilities, to be fair. But I wanted to start small and see kind of where that goes, but have different topics related to what comes up. So it's more of an organic approach, which I don't usually do. But I thought that this is the space to do it. So I have to, everything that I usually, I guess, would have discomfort in. So say the unknowns and stuff. I'm treating this as a way to experiment and learn and kind of see how it evolves. But initially I think we're going to have it about every 6 weeks. But I haven't had the chance yet to reflect on it. with my
Right.
with my facilitator as well to see what's next. But we did have a planning session beforehand where we jotted a few different themes, and it seems like the conversations we have informs the next one. So I think I think that's a good way to build it on, like small little feedback loops basically, and see how it grows.
Yeah. So, because that type of conversation, that's intriguing for so many people. And especially when you talk about this, the blind spot, the privileged blind spot, that will open people's eyes.
Yeah, exactly. And it has to start with that. It's like the basics, right? It's trying to understand what are the fundamentals and basics that now I take for granted, but I wanted to share that in different forms. So it could be conversation first leads to a more in-depth workshop, and maybe a course at some point, but it needs to have the smaller building blocks in place to try out different formats.
So if anyone's interested what you are doing, how do they contact you? Where can people find you? Because it's nearly 8:45 and we'd better wrap up.
Oh, wow, that's gone quick. Well, you can start off with the Instagram, because that has the profile of everything. So that is Inclusive Pioneers. You can find that on there. That would probably be the easiest first spot to look at. That has the bio links and actually the story of Invisible Voices Matter, and all the different links of certain like meetups and signups and things are all there.
And your LinkedIn?
And then you can find me on my LinkedIn where I've posted a few things. So that's I believe it's Rachel S. Liu, Liu.
Let me check, because I was looking. Rachel Liu.
I'm not sure if it's got an S or not, actually. I think it's with Rachel S. Liu. I'm just looking it up. And that will have the posts of the most recent stuff. So I was also recently in a podcast, which is all talking about cultures and things too. So you can find me there.
So thanks much for your time. And it's Sunday. And I definitely think I need to change my time in a bit of my interview, because as I mentioned to you before, I started it a couple of years ago. Kids were little, so it was quite good time for them to go to bed. And they would go to bed, and I start
Makes sense.
But now they all grown. Right. So thanks very much, and thanks everyone who joined us as well. And we'll see you next week. And
thanks so much
for your time as well, Rachel.
Lovely chatting to you. Bye.
I'll end it.